Welcome, my good friend, Zia Khan, the Chief Innovation Officer at the Rockefeller Foundation. Welcome, Zia.
Dov, it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to exploring some topics here together.
Again, welcome, Zia, and we're going to talk about these big ideas, but more importantly, really be the beneficiaries of insight from you and so much practical wisdom that you earned the way wisdom is earned, the hard way over a long period of time. I should also say that it's great to be in a partnership that the Howe Institute for Society and the Rockefeller Foundation have come together to form a partnership around moral leadership with a distinct focus on the social sector and ways in which the social sector can have outsized impact, for lack of a better way of putting it. So again, welcome, Zia. A bit of a formal introduction. Zia is currently the Chief Innovation Officer at the Rockefeller Foundation, where he leads the Rockefeller Foundation pretty much at all the new frontiers of the foundation's work, of ideas, cross-sector coalitions, and anything that is considered a breakthrough solution, and anything that is really a big bet that the Rockefeller Foundation is making. And before that, Zia was a management and strategy consultant at Katzenbach Partners, where you really focused on both the informal structures and maybe even more importantly on the informal dynamics of organizations and how the two could be harmonized to create just great performance and impact, both in terms of an organization's desired goals, but also in society.
That's right, yes, and hopefully we'll touch on those topics today.
And I could go on, but Zia has more graduate degrees than we can count. But what I really admire about you as a former student and teacher is how you have brought together the human side of life and of business. But before that, you were an engineer. You really looked at the hard contours of how things work. So maybe we can start with that as a segue into something personal about you. Tell us a bit about your upbringing. How does somebody get on this current path of innovation? And how does somebody specifically get on this current path of innovation that brings together the human side of organizational success and performance and the structural and what would be really about strategy and structure and engineering and how we engineer organizations that thrive and how you marry the two?
So my family's originally from India. I grew up in Canada. My father was a scientist. And I can remember, and lots of people of my generation who were growing up in the 80s had this experience, who were second generation, with parents of Indian origin, is growing up in Ottawa, Canada. It's a government university town. Everyone is pretty much middle class. I would say plus or minus 20% in terms of anyone's wealth or resources. And then summers would go to India, where the disparity was just enormous. That's something that always lurked in my mind. My father, being a scientist, got me interested in science and math. I went to school, studied engineering. Didn't really want to work as an engineer, so kept on going and got my PhD in fluid dynamics. At that time, I realized I really liked solving problems. Management consulting firms who were recruiting in all sorts of graduate programs as they were expanding who they wanted to hire. Learned a lot in consulting about the analytical side of strategy, but it's when I joined Katzenbach Partners, which was founded by our friend Nico Kanner, and I also got to work with John Katzenbach, where we started to understand the human motivators of performance. What were the emotional connections, culture, values, networks, how we need to marry those with the formal side of strategy, goals, and metrics to get the best out of both halves out of an organization. Spent about a decade doing that work. And then got interested in applying those skills to the social sector. At that time, Judith Rodin was president of the Rockefeller Foundation. She was on lots of boards where she saw the role of strategy, how it helped those organizations, wanted to do the same at Rockefeller, joined in a strategy capacity. And then when our recent president, Raj Shah, joined, that's when I started to focus on innovation.
What curiosities from your early days really inform and animate the through line of your life's and professional work?
So I think there's probably two main curiosities that I've had, Dov. One is, how to solve problems, how to crack the nut, make things better. That's there's an engineering approach, there's design thinking, there's art, there's all sorts of people who are just kind of taking that next step to try and make things better than the status quo. And that's been an innovation passion of mine. The other curiosity is, how do people work together? How do we collaborate? How do we get the best and most energy out of people? How can we operate from more of a place of love and excitement instead of fear and control? Even though fear and control manifests itself, so maybe we need to understand what those organizations look like. So just the idea of collaboration and how people work together has been really fascinating to me as well.
So we mentioned this partnership. Obviously, at its core, we aim to build platforms and practices and do this in a non-static but dynamic, innovative way with others around the proverbial table. But we're really there to prove out a hypothesis that moral leadership is in fact integral to how organizations not only work, but should work if they want to have maximal impact and endure. But what is it about your focus at Rockefeller that really excited you and I think inspired you to form this partnership? What's your vision for it? Obviously, we believe that we can do more in partnership than apart.
I think there's a mistaken notion that innovation is one person's brilliant idea, and that's what propels everything forward. So even if you take Thomas Edison and what work he did, what he really did is he created one of the first corporate R&D labs where lots of people were innovating. And then it went out, into the world, and that's how we got electricity in cities, not because of one person. So there's this need for lots of people to keep pushing, keep trying things, taking risk, and to do so in some level of common cause. The second area where I think I see us getting stuck is around collaborating across sectors. So everyone will talk about, we need more partnerships, we need more private-public partnerships, yet we don't see that happening anywhere that much. And I was thinking we need sort of new approaches around this. And it's not strategies, it's not insights, it's not financing models. We need to somehow help people be inspired and motivated to kind of deploy their energy, take risks in service of coming up with big innovations that have impact, but then also to work across boundaries where they are stuck in their organizations, realizing their organization strategies and values.
At this juncture, Zia, paint a picture of how you believe we can rethink and then redesign institutions, especially in the social sector, where moral leadership is, as you put it, an X factor, or at the center, infusing and informing how everything gets done, how a social sector institution operates and navigates a pretty new world.
We just have to rethink what it means to lead an organization, what even an organization is. So if you or I were to walk into another organization, ask them, what is the organization? What we would probably get is an org chart. This is how responsibilities are carved out. This is how power works. This is sort of who makes decisions. But there's probably a future where the first thing you would get is a statement of values, of an organization, or this is kind of how we work, how we tackle problems, versus how we're organized and how we're distributing power. So I feel we need to see a sort of softness in the boundaries, not only within organizations of how they think about collaborating and how people work and how we can inspire everyone to contribute, but we need that porousness between the private sector and government, between civil society and universities, so that everyone can work together a little bit better.
In our time together, you've come across to me as particularly optimistic or confident that there are some shifts underway, especially in the social sector, that make it more possible to maybe put moral leadership at the center. And through a playbook of moral leadership, redesign institutions for the impact that were created to have. Am I right? What's going on out there to make you optimistic, or to make you wanting to devote so much time and energy that you've been devoting to this topic?
Well, Dev, like you, and I've learned so much from you, I've always believed in moral leadership. I may not hit the bar that I want for myself all the time, but have always believed that if we can just tap people's potential and get them to work together and be inspired and in service of something meaningful to humanity, we'll get the most out of them.
Mhm.
I feel that message felt like a vitamin to most people. Something they probably knew they should take, didn't really kind of understand if it was helpful for them, but did it on faith. I think the world has changed now where it is a painkiller. And I believe you can drive change with painkillers better than you can with vitamins because people feel the need. And I think the knee-jerk reaction for everyone is to search for a policy, search for a strategy, search for an answer that they can defer to versus the hard work of thinking of the moral implications of a situation in context and to work with people to wrestle their way to an answer.
You recently joined and led some sessions at the Howe Institute's Summit on Moral Leadership, where we acknowledge that this is hard work and therefore leaders from different sectors of society and business came together to do this work in community. Why is it so important to do this work in community? And then paint a picture of how the Rockefeller Foundation and the Howe Institute have designed our partnership to do the work in community.
Well, let me tell you a quick story that might illustrate my thinking on this. We were doing some work on mitigating food loss in Africa. And it turns out that if you pluck a mango from a tree and you get some of the acid from the sap on it, it ruins the skin and people don't want to buy it because it looks less attractive. So they were training farmers on how to pluck the mangoes from the trees. And it was watching them all work together and learn from each other. Some people had a little tactic, another tactic. It normalized it. They felt excited about it. It made me just think about the benefit of learning in community and feeling a sense of identity in community around picking up a new set of skills or ideas. And so while that might sound like a small scale example, it to me illustrates the spirit of the House Summit and the community that we're trying to build, which is to activate people's identity, know that they have fellow travelers, but I think most importantly, to learn from each other. You know, these things are, as we mentioned, are sometimes easy to say at a high level, but hard to actualize and realize in the day-to-day, you know, rough and tumble of organizational life. And to know that you have peers that you can tap or people are generating tactics that you can learn from, I think that's true of any kind of community that's trying to innovate and do something differently. It's just much more effective because you have way more ideas and practices. And if they feel comfortable with each other to share where there's failing, where things are working. So I feel the idea of learning and driving change in community is really important.
You've written and you do a lot of writing, but I was struck by, I think, a pithy but equally profound adage that you've put out there, that innovation typically demands urgency or the train doesn't leave the station. The change that innovation asks for requires momentum or the train doesn't leave the station. Breakthrough solutions, which are the kind of ones that innovation points to, push us into unfamiliar and uncharted territory before policies, process, or even public opinion can catch up and give the innovation itself a fighting chance to endure, okay? And then complicating this is when you work with the kind of urgency that you call for, that means taking risks. What do you do to create a high trust environment where these risks are being taken? How do you cultivate this kind of environment that encourages the kind of risk that points at a North Star?
Well, Dev, maybe I can share sort of my personal journey on that. And this is almost an embarrassing thing to admit, but many years ago, I was working with an executive coach, and I started to realize that part of my problem is I started to think that I had the answers, you know, as the leader. And I had a lot of confidence. Yeah, you know, studied a lot, I'd learned a lot from various experiences. And so I think the first step is for a leader or anyone in an organization to recognize in uncharted territory, which is where we go with innovation, no one has the answers. And so we need everyone to be putting ideas on the table. And so how do you encourage people to A, recognize that the leader may have confidence in what they're trying to do and where they're going, but they don't have the answers, I think helps create the space and the obligation, the mutual obligation for everyone to understand we got to collectively shape this answer. And so I think that's one step of, building trust and enabling risk.
Now let's go back to society. In partnership, we're really trying to bring to the table a world of venerated institutions in the social sphere, and seeing to what extent can moral leadership and how moral leaders put more trust in the room than they remove from it can create more virtuous cycles of innovation. But we're doing it at a time where the starting point is pretty low trust in institutions. A lot of polarization, a lot of disagreement, from our justice system to what's happening in our politics and in our media. In that context, at large, how do we get traction against this macro backdrop?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dov. And let me start with an example that gives me some hope, and see if we can extend it to the picture you're painting. So we've started to support some work here in the United States called citizen assemblies. It's a technique that's used elsewhere in the world. But it's really about going to the roots of what is democracy. It's about getting people together to articulate a goal and come up with a solution for how they're going to get to that goal. So a citizen assembly is randomly selected people, kind of like a jury, who come together, are informed by experts, deliberate over a few days, and come up with proposals to really tricky issues like what should end of life look like, or how are we going to tackle what our education or even books should be read in school, or things like that, where there is no sort of expert answer, but we just got to get that answer collectively. And what's remarkable, if you were to watch one of these citizen assemblies, is just by virtue of people talking to each other, probing each other, understanding that everyone is a human, has their own human challenges, and surfaces the humanity of everyone working together, I think we get to positive outcomes. Not everyone's going to agree necessarily. We're not expecting anyone to change their political philosophy or their ideas. And so that to me is a microcosm of what I think needs to happen much more. We need to be in much more conversation about what is happening, why are things that are in place, why are they in place in a certain way, what are the reasons for that? And what I'm feeling right now is just that conversation is not happening. We're learning about things through extreme forms of social media, in sound bites. We're not engaging with people, we're engaging with tweets or posts. So somehow we need to create that sense of dialogue and exchange, largely to get the ideas across, but also to just recognize that the person across the table is a human as well. And no one is more human than another person. So I think that's a leveling playing field that we've lost over the past decades and we need to reclaim.
So with all of this said, and it really resonates, what are some of the most effective ways to connect all these dots?
I think it comes back to scale, which is something that has really animated you and I in thinking about this work. And I sometimes look at the social sector and I draw an analogy. I live in Brooklyn, and there's no shortage of artisanal cheese shops in Brooklyn. You can create this perfect bespoke cheese shop. It's a whole complete experience, and you might have 10 customers a day. It's an entirely different thing to change the cheese that is bought in Safeway across the country. And that's the mindset, how do we really go big? And I think we're at an interesting point around there's early adopters and believers who will sort of agree and they can really carry the flag. But we need to reach a broader set of people for whom moral leadership, they may need to see some more proof points around how it solves their problems. And so what I'm excited about in our partnership, our experiments, is to start to meet people where they are with what performance issue, what problem they're wrestling with, and try and illustrate and demonstrate how moral leadership is an angle there. I have a lot of conviction around how it can support innovation, which everyone complains about. They want their organization to be more innovative. They want more innovation. And they're looking for analytical frameworks or strategies when really I think it's moral leadership, which is unleashing trust and unleashing people to do that.
But most innovation is about the what? Amazing human beings with magical ideas and the right energy, innovative. And the innovation in this case is in my hand. And I call that innovating in the what. The innovation results in something. What if we focused on innovating in the how? Literally how we went about things.
Yeah.
What would it look like to be that innovative in the how, which we tend to be more static about, right?
I always use the classic when I think of innovation at scale and its secondary benefits, the idea of putting a man on the moon. That was a goal, that was a mission, it felt important. Yet there were so many how innovations, all the way from how NASA was organized, how they contracted with the private sector, how they led, how they motivated people, how everyone felt that they were on a mission, literally and figuratively, to get this thing accomplished that felt really meaningful. So the benefit, I think, of the innovation in the how is once you build that muscle, it can get deployed to a wide range of issues and challenges. So we need a lot of innovation in affordable housing. That probably is going to require a lot of innovation in the how. It's a very contested subject that we need lots of new ideas. We need to take down old paradigms and ways of thinking. But if we can build those muscles in the innovation of the how, we can then point that towards food security or helping people get access to benefits or getting better health care. So I feel that the returns on innovation in the how is really critical and important.
In addition to engendering trust, another practice of moral leadership that you and I talk about a lot is the pause. Because in the pause, we reflect on what's going on in the world that even creates the imperative for the innovation. We reconnect with, first principles and the values and the human concerns that are really animating the whole thing. We can continuously rethink our assumptions, and then and only then can we reimagine probably the most effective and efficacious path. How do you bring this pause into the work of innovation? Just as a leader, as an executive. And then second question, in a personal way, what are some of your practices around the pause, where you pause to be the best moral leader you can be?
Pause is hard, Dov. The pause is hard. It's something I've been very much working on. We are so geared in organizations to deliver. We have annual goals become quarterly goals, become weekly goals, a person who can move fast, and action is prioritized. So there is all this momentum that works against the pause, in my belief. And I think even just having that word at the tip of my tongue is useful. When I'm searching for what might be the right thing to do, a pause isn't something that comes to mind until I've reflected more on it. And it's something that I picked up when you came to share your ideas with our senior leadership team, to just kind of recognize that pattern and recognize not only the pattern of the pause, but the situations that demand pauses. When it feels like we're on the frontier of something, the environment's changed, circumstances has changed, team members may be expressing things that they weren't expressing before, to recognize that, oh, this growing friction and slowing, actually the right thing to do is to take a step back instead of trying to micro problem solve the way to keep up momentum or action just for the sake of it. And there's an expression that I really like, which is, the reason we put brakes on cars is to go fast, not to go slow. But to recognize that you have that brake is the way that gives you the confidence to move quickly and such. So I actually believe if a team has a norm and an understanding of the pause, and it doesn't feel that unusual, it allows them to take the risks of moving very quickly and going forward, because they know they can pull on that when they need to.
The pause is not about how many minutes you do it. It's not taking a break from things. It's active. What matters is what you do in the pause. What question you ask yourself. So as you endeavor to be in a pause and be in motion, is there a question or two that you try to ask yourself to make your pause worthwhile?
I think what I found most helpful, Dov, around the pause is the notion of reframing. So it is the notion of, hey, this is what I think is the question or the problem that's right in front of us. But if we take a step back, what's another way to frame that problem or that question? That I've found to be very, very helpful, and that I think leads to some of it can help explain the current situation a little bit better, but more importantly, I think it opens up possibilities of what to do next a little bit more. So the idea of pausing and trying to get to that, well, this is what I think is going on, which takes a little bit of introspection for a team, for a leader, and then to think, is there another way to kind of frame, what this is after we reconnect with our values and what we're trying to do.
What nonetheless gives you hope? First question. And then I want to ask you about what are you seeing in younger generations that not only gives you hope, but how are they going about things that should be lessons for us?
Yeah, well, Dov, the mission of the foundation has remained a constant, and it's a most compact form. It's about improving the well-being of humanity throughout the world, and it's that notion of improving, and we don't know what the frontiers of improving are going to be. Those frontiers are going to change over time, but we have to be in this continuous quest to improve, and I think that's been something that's been really motivating to me. And of course, it's changed in its strategies and the more detailed programs over the decades to try and meet the moment for what's most needed. But the idea that we can always improve, and it has shown itself to be possible over the past 100 years, and I see no reason why it can't be for the next 100 years. So that just feels to me like a worthwhile goal in which to direct innovation and in which to direct collaboration, of which I think moral leadership in where we are now will be that X factor and that secret sauce. So I remain very optimistic about that, and I remain optimistic about our partnership to help add fuel to that engine as well. It's the younger generations, to me, what I find so energizing, and I teach a class every now and then at different universities, and the main purpose is to kind of engage with students and just see how they're thinking, how they're reacting. And it's wonderful because they don't care who I am at all. They don't think they're going to get any money from the Rockefeller Foundation, so they're perfectly comfortable throwing out challenging questions and such. But what I find encouraging is that they don't have an assumption around the institutions or the arrangements of the past are going to be the right ones, and they don't have an assumption that that's how they're going to build their own status or their own prestige. I feel like there's been a shift in terms of at least my conversations and engagement, and that opens up a lot of new possibilities. So, part of the problem of why we have our current institutions and our models is because of prestige. It's because they're designed to make people feel important. I think new generations are redefining what's important to them, and so they feel a little bit more like flexible clay in a way that can be energized and come up with new models to achieve the goals and get us unstuck, because we are in a time of high change.
That's inspiring to hear, and thank you. Zia Khan, thank you, Zia, for being with us and imparting so much in this How conversation.
Thank you, Dov. Thank you.